Have you noticed that just about every game lately that people are excited for were developed by Japan, China, Korea, other Eastern countries? Meanwhile, Western AAA studios keep delaying, canceling, rebooting, and just flopping their releases miserably. I've been watching this shift happen for years. Initially, it was very slow, but more recently, it's been escalating very, very quickly. Why are Eastern countries absolutely dominating right now? And what does it mean for the future of Western AAA? Before we get into culture, censorship, work ethic, let's look at some hard facts that we have on hand. There's real data supporting this, and if you've been following the industry even casually, you will be well aware of it. Japan brought us From Software, a studio that brought us Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Sekiro. FromSoft makes games that don't try to be mainstream, and yet they still find themselves beating out most of Western AAA titles. It shouldn't be possible, but it is. Nintendo, another Japanese company, brings Mario, Zelda, extremely well-known IPs that dominate every sector of gaming. Nintendo ships polished, finished games that don't need very much patching afterwards. Capcom, another Japanese company, makes Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, two huge IPs. Street Fighter as well is huge. And then, of course, there's Hoyoverse, the Genshin Impact developers, who make an insane profit from their gacha games. Genshin Impact's revenue is absurd. Honkai Star Rail's revenue is absurd. And then there's Korean studios who excel in the MMO genre. When I say excel in the MMO genre, I don't mean by quality. I don't mean by many of the metrics that should matter. I mean in terms of revenue, because they use a lot of predatory practices to stay on top. However, the point still stands that Korean MMOs are very popular. Meanwhile, we have EA canceling everything. We have Activision with excessive layoffs. Who even knows what Ubisoft is doing? I don't think Ubisoft knows what Ubisoft is doing. The difference in momentum is absolutely wild. Here's where I think the West went wrong. Western companies saw the success of Fortnite and other live service video games and decided that they would base a lot of their development on those. Everything became a battle pass. Everything needed endless seasons. Everything needed skins. Even games that should have been single player. Avengers flopped because of forced monetization. Suicide Squad died almost on impact, and Halo Infinite, while it was pretty good, it failed because it was built like a service game with no plan. You can't build a game with a social ecosystem and a monetization funnel without insanely good direction. And the thing is, most studios don't, and it shows. And then there's just the fact that many Western games aren't built for players anymore. They're built for the quarterly earnings calls. Remember Cyberpunk? Remember how that turned out? That was rushed early, extremely early. Redfall as well. Redfall was a disaster. Battlefield 2042 launched and it was barely a video game. The Western culture for video games became ship now, apologize later, patch for maybe a year, and then move on. Meanwhile, Eastern studios delay the game if it's not ready. They don't have a need to apologize because their game works. Their game is great. Here's one of the biggest issues with Western developers as well. When there's 1,000 people in a company and they all have veto power, you get nothing done. You are not productive. Nothing beneficial comes of that. There are oftentimes way too many cooks in the kitchen for anything to get done. In the end, this mess just creates bland video games. Far Cry started to become copy and paste. Assassin's Creed, you already know how that went. Honestly, that's every Ubisoft game. It's an open world that's completely empty and soulless. Live service games just became everything to everybody. Here's what Eastern studios are doing better. Eastern games still have strong creative directors. Miyazaki, Yoshi P, Yoko Taro. You can feel the identity in these games. You can tell a Miyazaki game instantly. You can tell a Nintendo game instantly. There's vision. There's not committee design like you'll see in Western games. Most Western AAA games, you could swap the logo and have no idea who developed what. This is probably one of the biggest differences between the Eastern and Western culture of gaming. Japan, especially, still targets core players. They aren't afraid of difficulty, depth, niche appeal. Monster Hunter's got a weird learning curve. Souls-likes are very difficult. Persona often has slow pacing, and Yakuza is just it's Yakuza. You don't see a Yakuza in the West. Western AAA is terrified of alienating anyone, and in the end, they just appeal to no one. Eastern live service also respects identity. Genshin, Honkai, say what you will about these games. They know who they're for. They know what their identity is. They're stylish, polished, and actually deliver content. There's also a pretty strong difference in censorship. While China does have some pretty strict governmental censorship, The West has very strong corporate censorship, as in PR risks and brand safety. Neither side is completely free, but they both do have things to be afraid of. Japan is console first, hardcore first. China is mobile first, and they have a mastery of monetization. And the West is broad mass market. However, it can't be understated that Eastern culture often suffers from extreme crunch culture, which should not be celebrated. However, it does affect the final product. Global revenue is shifting east. Creativity is shifting east. Trust in AAA titles in the West is failing, and indies are rising to fill the Western gaps. Western AAA feels like Hollywood. It's safe, expensive, predictable. At the end of the day, this isn't East versus West. It's vision-first developers versus profit-first developers. The East is dominating because, get this, they're making video games for people who want to play their video games. Western AAA can still bounce back. Baldur's Gate 3 was proof of this. But they really need to check themselves. They have to stop chasing engagement charts and just ship something with a heartbeat.